Hey, what's up, guys? This is What's Up here, and I'm bringing you back another video. Today, I'm going to do something unusual and a little experimental, see if I want to try this and this whole retrospective film theory or whatever going on. Anyway, for the past several weeks, I've been watching the Askewniverse films made by Kevin Smith, starting with Clerks up until Clerks 3 from 1994 and 2023, and surprisingly they are pretty like inspirational films. So the way I look at it is, when you look at a film from a director's perspective, you always wonder if it's a author's intent to like conceive something in you, like whether it's a feeling, an emotion, like social commentary. Usually when you look at a big famous director like Steven Spielberg, you'll look back at their films and wonder like what were they doing at the time, like in their 20s, like were amateur filmmakers trying to make it big out there, or were they trying to do something for fun, which in that turn turned into a career success for them. But in this case with Kevin Smith, I believe all of his works, all of his films he's done in this universe always relate to some event or personal life that really affected his work. And he tries to bring a conceivable way to get everyone to relate with him, whether it's like social relationships, drama, like sexuality, how to deal with the loss of somebody, and also the fact that he's a Star Wars nerd, which you'll probably see on a lot of his films. Like, it's no big surprise that Kevin Smith is a huge Star Wars fan, and every now and then he'll take a jab at Lucas's work or whatever. But besides that, I think the takeaways from these films I've noticed is he's launched a lot of actors in their careers, like Ben Affleck, Jason Lee, and a bunch of others. But if you notice throughout, you notice like both him and his production crew are in the films, so they're kind of like long life friends, and that's kind of like what takes away from the whole thing. It's not just this like AAA budget studio with like big actors and big lists like doing something. No, it's just a guy who wanted to do filmmaking for a living and like share his perspective of life and the world he lives in. And also the fact that you may ask yourself, how can I relate to these movies as an audience? Do I work at a dead end job, or do I find myself in these circumstances? Also, one thing I like to note is the characters Jay and Silent Bob appear practically in all their films. They're practically like a trademark duel. So anything you'll see in a View Askew film, you'll probably see them in one point. However, I like to clarify that not all the films are sequels, except Clerks and Jay and Silent Bob, but they all take place in the same universe, or the setting, which is Leonardo, New Jersey, which I didn't know existed until I looked it up. All right, so the first film I'm going to review is Clerks in 1984. So the setting is in this is shot in Leonardo, New Jersey, as I stated before, and it's one of those films that became a cult following niche films that started out small, but over time has grown a fan base. And the fact that it's shot in black and white also makes it like separate from other films of the time, like Jurassic Park or Forrest Gump or anything. This is a film about working at a dead end job at a quick stop market, and the characters in this film are Dante Hicks and Rendell Graves, played by Brian O'Halloran and Jeff Anderson. And then you also got your Jay and Silent Bob, so Jason Mewes and Kevin Smith. But it also revolves around Dante's girlfriends, Veronica and Caitlin, played by Marilyn Gigliotti and Lisa Spooner. Also in the film, if you look carefully, the background actors are Smith's friends like Walt Flanagan and Scott Mosier. And the whole theme of this movie has to do with social and personal struggle. So again, as I said, it's working at a dead end job. Like if you ever been at a gas station or a quickie mart stop, whatever, you'll probably relate it to it in some way, or working at a video cassette tape or whatever. And also making their appearance unexpectedly, if you notice, is Mitch O'Connor, Mitch O'Cohen, who is the Toxic Avenger star of 1984 with that film made by Lloyd Kaufman and Kaufman Productions. And he has seen his appearances like when Dante and Veronica were having a fight, and he's that guy like sitting out in the back or whatever. But to get back on Clerks, it's you'll have to like watch it for yourself and see how Kevin Smith really made the work into his production. Because keep in mind that he sold a lot of comic books that he worked at a comic book store for the production of this film, so he had to downsize something to make something appear. It's like kind of like in the same state that like Rocky Balboa had to like, or Sylvester Stallone had to sell his dog to make money for like the script for his movie Rocky, and then afterwards he bought it. He bought his dog back, just like the same thing with Kevin Smith. He bought his comic books back. I also think that Clerks is one of those like pretty funny films that not like in the sense that it's a comedy, but it's just like, it's like a casual conversation between you and a friend. So like what your friend thinks of Star Wars or whatever, like again, he's just a massive Star Wars fan. Like he just brings Randall the character into talking a lot about him. And so yeah, I highly recommend watching Clerks and give it a try or whatever. The next movie I want to go over is Mallrats, released in 1995. You guys ever remember going to a mall growing up? Because I think the last time I ever went to a mall was probably like, what, like 2 years ago, and it was practically like 3 miles away from here. I just feel like nobody goes to the mall anymore. Like it's 2023, and not many people like are literally going to the mall to hang out. But back in the 90s and the early 2000s, that would be your to go place. So in this film, the characters are two like guys who struggle to break up with their girlfriends. You got Jeremy Iron London playing T.S. Quinn and Jason Lee playing as Brody Bruce. And you also notice that this isn't a Clerks sequel. It's a film that takes place in the same universe as Clerks. So this is something Kevin Smith will establish as a principle throughout his VSQ universe. And that's what really sets it apart from the time. So you expect like a sequel to the film that started all right, but according to Kevin Smith, he has a really ambitious plan to establish like a shared universe, and he did it before MCU did. So in their face. So anyway, the film practically is about like both friends are dumped by their girlfriends, so they seek refuge in the local mall. And pretty much the characters in this film you'll start to see like later, like first appearances actually is are Ben Affleck and Joey Lauren Adams, yeah, who will play eventually like Elisa Jones in Chasing Amy. Other characters made in this film are Ethan Sibley, who's the freaking SIBO guy, which I really love. I think that guy's hilarious. He tries to he's looking at like one of those like images like that, or like what do you see in the image? Sort of like a Rorschach test, you know. And so I think that was really funny. And then you also got Michael Rooker of all people. He played Jared Svenning, who's the game host and father of one of the girlfriends to the protagonists. And also in this film are a lot of cameos, which Kevin Smith will on and on use not just like as a reference to like said characters, but also like the actors. So in this film, you got Brian O'Halloran returning again, who plays as Gil Hicks, which is Dante's brother, surprisingly. And he and some actors in Smith's movies play different characters throughout the film. So that I think that's really like what's like a really like creative way of like reusing the same people, but like not having to buy out a lot more actors. Also in this film is comic book legendary Stan Lee of all people. As you can tell, Kevin Smith is a huge comic book nerd, so I bet at one point during production he asked Stan Lee if he wanted to make an appearance in this film, which he obliged, and he was given a script. And if you like look at the behind the scenes, you can see they both are getting along really well, and it's just kind of really wholesome and awesome to see like Stan Lee like in a non Marvel MCU movie. Overall, I think Mallrats is something of its time, and just like Clerks, it really like set a cult following because not many people would know what Mallrats is. If you go out to ask anybody what Mallrats is, they'll probably look at you like looking strangely weird in the face. They're like, What are you talking about? I've never heard that film." So anyway, after Mallrats, Kevin Smith set out to make another film, which is something more the likes of the same structure of Mallrats. That it's not a sequel to Clerks, but it's rather another film that takes place in the same universe. And that film is Chasing Amy, released in 1997. So this movie I discovered is apparently about a way of Kevin Smith coping with the relationship between him and Joey Lauren Adams, who plays the titular character Alyssa Jones. I think that's kind of a neat way to, as an artist, to express their struggles and emotions, because usually when we make films, it's like something out of a really cool inspiration idea, but sometimes it has to be something personal, it doesn't have to be like, all action flick or high class, like filmmaking that somebody at Hollywood would make in a day. No, it's just like something personal. Also, the fact that before I get into the plot, I want to mention that Chasing Amy is one of Quentin Tarantino's films from 1997. So that really set the boundaries to connect with him and Kevin Smith, because as you know, directors would sometimes watch each other's films and they were like be really impressed or like fond of like how their different views are. So that's pretty cool. Anyway, so the plot of Chasing Amy has to do with comic book artists and lifelong friends Holden McNeil, played by Ben Affleck again, who reprises his role from Mallrats, and Banky Edwards, same thing with Jason Lee. And I think the whole thing about Chasing Amy is the whole social commentary, which deals with like exploring sexuality and how it has to do with like letting go of someone special that you love so much. So you know how like I don't know about you guys, but in my high school years, I had a crush on a few people, and I wasn't really sure if I get along with them. I did as like what other person would do. I would just ask them out, or I just talk to them, and yeah, here and there were a few rejections or whatever. But I think the whole thing is just like letting go of someone special, like like stop chasing them. Like you find someone else, you'll be okay. And I think that's the whole theme of this movie is what Smith did with his girlfriend. He basically wanted to make a film, a like comedy romantic film, by the way, which I don't usually like watch, but I think it really fits in this case of the film. Um, it's really something along the lines of just like, if you have someone in your life that you've been loving wholeheartedly, dearly, and I know there's going to be some people out there who will like relate to this film because they have been at least with one person in their life, and when that like separation moment comes and goes, they're like really sad and they really wish they could be with that person, but at one point we have to mature. We have to get up on our feet and move along. We can't spend like all our lives just wasting time like chasing this person. And I think that's a really good message to take away. And the whole other thing is chasing your own dreams. As I said before, the protagonists in the film are comic book artists. They want to launch their IP work, Bloodman and Chronic, which, by the way, will be a reoccurring like fictional intellectual property in his other films. And that's the whole thing is like how do you balance between your social life and your career? Do you focus one aspect on the other, or do you leave the other behind so you can focus on this one? And that's like the whole like dual dynamic between Brody or between Banky and Holden is Holden wants to chase this girl who's a lesbian, by the way, but it looks like that way. I won't spoil it, but you have to watch it yourself. And Banky is looking at him, thinking crazy. He's like, "Why are you doing this? Like, we have a whole future ahead of us. We are comic book artists. Like, we're better off without anyone interfering." You know what I'm saying? Like, that's the whole gist of what's going behind. I think that's like something I noticed when I was watching it the first time and reflecting back to it. So overall, I think Chasing Amy's a really good like comedy romantic film if you're like not into those bits. Not like it's not gonna hurt if you're gonna watch it, you know. So on to that, 2 years later in 1999 is Dogma, which is one of the odd one out of the bunch of his films, and it has to do with religious themes. Which when I looked up Kevin Smith's life, apparently he at one point was like spiritual, you know, like I don't know too much about him personally, but from what it says on Wikipedia, like he was spiritual at one point, like he was considered like a deist or whatever, but then over time he's changed or evolved because of things affecting his personal life. And I think right now, I think he's not spiritual anymore. I think he's just more like a atheist or someone or whatever. But anyway, the story in Dogma is a crazy one, a crazy stupid plot. If I might add, it's just really like out of the spoken, you know. So it has to do with like two angels who were kicked out of heaven by God, and they're trying to figure out a loophole to re-enter back in to defy that he is infallible or like someone who is incapable of proving wrong. Because if that were the case, then therefore, like it would literally do all creation alive. Like I don't even know what Kevin Smith was doing when he was smoking when he was making this film or whatever. But yeah, that's just pretty much the premise of what I seen. And so the two angels are Loki and Barnaby, which, if you look really closely, you'll notice that the character archetypes are flipped around, like from their fictional counterparts to their real life counterparts. So if you don't know, Loki is obviously the god of mischief in Norse mythology, and he's the brother of Thor. Barnaby is just some angel, and then there's another angel of the film who's played by Jason Lee called Azrael, who's the god of or the actually the Angel of Death. Yeah, Angel of Death, obviously. But Loki and Barnaby are played by Matt Damon and Ben Affleck, which again, like, this is like right after their peak in Good Will Hunting. If you haven't seen it before, it's a really good movie. I recommend. And what's crazy in this film is there's other roles or characters that play an important part of the film. So Jay and Silent Bob are supposedly the two prophets coming to stop like the world from ending. And then the last scion, who's a relative of Jesus, is like an abortion clinic counselor named Bethany Sloan, played by Linda Florentino. First thoughts I went to this film, I was expecting something like eccentric and not too crazy, but also keeping in mind that it's a Kevin Smith film, so you may never know whatever. Also in this film is Salma Hayek, who plays a character named Muse, and I know from people around this time who have seen From Dusk Till Dawn, yeah, she is in the film. And you know who else is in the film is Chris Rock. Apparently, he plays supposedly the 13th apostle named Rufus. Other people in this film coming is George Carlin, who's a comedian. He's like a famous comedian. He plays a cardinal. Jason Lee's Azrael, as I said before. And then you got Alan Rickman, out of all people, to play a character named Metatron. I was like, what? Is that Alan Rickman? From like Hans Gruber from Die Hard and freaking Severus Snape from Harry Potter? Like, that's just crazy. Like the casting in this film is just like out of this world, and to hit and to make a or to hit the nail on the head, God is supposedly portrayed as a woman and is played by you know who, Alanis Morissette, who's that one singer from the '90s that you can't get your head out of with that stupid song Irony or whatever. Also in this film is a bunch of like cultural following. So like the Buddy Christ meme, which is like a very old meme by the way. That when I saw that, I was like, oh, that's where that meme came from. Like it makes sense. Also in this film is the first establishment of a corporation, fast food restaurant corporation called Mubi, which we'll see later on, like in the later future films or whatever. So overall, I think this movie is just pretty crazy and wacky out of there. I mean, it has some moments and some like humorous like ideas, but I think it's just funny seeing like Ben Affleck and Matt Damon playing like two angels like out to like cause mayhem, mischievous, and especially Damon's performance. Like Damon is like really mischievous and he'll just like kill anybody who like stands in his way, while Affleck's character is just really meticulous and just like trying to focus on the mission, or whatever. But yeah, I think it's definitely worth a shot. So after these films, there comes a really interesting period in the VUSQ universe where Kevin Smith just wanted to make or focus on TV series, and that TV series is Clerks animated series, which came out in 2001. Which, by the way, when I was very young, I first saw it on Adult Swim or somehow, and I remember seeing it as a child. But revisiting it back with my friends, I noticed very short and at the time it was compared to other TV series. So if you don't know, Kevin Smith wanted to make a TV series about like a dozen of them, but ABC, the channel company that showcased whatever you see on TV, only ran like half of it, so you wouldn't even see like most of it, which is ironic because they only aired the first episode and then that's it. Like I don't even know what happened. Like, did people not like the show? Was it like too crude? Was it too like raunchy for the time? So basically, the rest of the TV series was released on straight to DVD or whatever. And I think it's just like you can give it a shot. Like it's not really long. Like again, it's like 6 episodes with like 2 parts for like each episode. So something along the lines of that. And yeah, it's very funny, but also like ironically stupid because let me tell you, in like the first episode, they reused a joke, right? Where Randall and Dante are climbing up a building, right? So they're like grappling rope. Dante or Randall says almost there, and then some random pot plant falls out of the sky and almost hits them, and then the camera pans like to the fixed angle to show that they were actually on ground level instead of roping up. And Dante says, "Why are we walking like this?" And I kid you not, they reuse that same joke for the next episode and the last episode, and it's just straight like ironically unfunny or stupidly funny, whatever you call it. One thing I wanted to mention about this is there is a deleted scene that shows to what happened at the funeral in Clerks 1. So if you don't know, in Clerks 1, Randall had Dante drive him to his cousin's funeral because of an accident that occurred with like somebody like else in the universe who did something. And we don't get to see what actually happened in Clerks 1, but at the end, they were like jumping out of the funeral home and like running away. However, in the Clerks anime series, we actually get to see what actually happens, and it's pretty self-explanatory or whatever. So yeah, at the time, animated series is just like it's very short, but it's definitely worth a watch because you get like a little more Clerks in your life. So if you were like a fan of Clerks and you want to see like it is a TV project or whatever, then there you go. So in that same year, Kevin Smith released his new film, Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, which at the time was good because it was like one of those like films you had to go see in the theaters or whatever. And the story with that film is Jay and Silent Bob go to Hollywood to stop a 1 minute chronic film stopping because apparently I guess they just than like people trash talking about their film, which by the way shows cases like the early like the early use of like the internet. So if you were like around that time and you didn't have like dial up internet, yeah, it was just crazy. And along the way, they made Diamond Thieves, one of them played by Shannon Elizabeth, and something goes wrong. I won't spoil it, but like a lot of crazy stuff happens. Also, there's Will Ferrell in there as a federal wildlife marshal, which is pretty funny to see Will Ferrell in like a movie that's really suited for him, especially a comedic movie. I think that's just really cool. And I want to heavily emphasize that this film contains both Carrie Fisher and Mark Hamill in it. So this is a film since 1983, Return of the Jedi, to have both Carrie Fisher and Mark Hamill in the same set with Jay and Silent Bob. Like, how crazy is that? Like, you have to be just like Kevin Smith had to do, how somehow find a way to get both Star Wars stars on the set of his film movie, and I think that's really just like out of the touch there. Also in this film that's heavily emphasized is Morris Day and the Time. So if you're like an 80s kid and you remember that song Jungle Love or whatever in like the whole association with Prince, I think they'll do whatever. One of my favorite scenes in this film is when Jay and Silent Bob are hiking and they get picked up by a mystery van, which turns out to be a Scooby Doo spoof or lookalikes. It's a mystery van that has people that look like Scooby Doo characters but aren't actually Scooby Doo. And by the way, Scooby Doo's voiced by Mark Hamill for no reason or whatever. I mean, yeah, I mean, like, just to get out of the way, a lot of crazy stuff happens. It's definitely worth a watch in 2001. I think you should see it and just, like, enjoy the 2001 dark comedy, like, of what's going on. And also, who makes their cameo in this film is Wes Craven, the director of Nightmare on Elm Street and Scream. And this ties back because Jay and Silent Bob actually made a small cameo in Scream 3, which I didn't know about until I looked at the trivia for IMDb, and I was surprised to see them. Um, and to top it all off, Harley Quinn Smith is in this film, which, if you don't know, by the way, that's Kevin Smith's daughter. He named her after Harley Quinn from freaking DC, and she plays his Bob as like a little kid, like at the beginning of the movie or whatever. So yeah, I think Jay and Silent Bob Strikes Back is like a really good, is a very worthy movie and film, and to watch and to like talk about it with the others because it's kind of like the most known staple series of the genre, other than like Clerks. So 5 years later, in 2006, we got Clerks 2, which there's something awful a lot about that shaky reality TV camera. So if you watch the film closely, instead of like an established director's shot of whatever film a way of filming, it's actually like one of those like shaky close up reality TV cameras, which I really don't mind, but it kind of makes it like a little off putting. It's like something is down about to happen. So anyway, in Clerks 2, the plot revolves around the quickie stop burns down along with the REST video that Randall works out. So now Dante and Randall have to work at movies alongside a teenager who's like a devout Christian named Elias and their manager Becky Scott, who's played by Rosario Dawson, which that kind of really surprised me because like as of today, right now, she's like well known for like other films or whatever, and playing Ahsoka Tano in Star Wars Mandalorian. I think that was just kind of like unexpected because I didn't realize that Kevin Smith would have like soon to be Star Wars actors, which kind of intriguing by the way when you think about it. Like all the actors in his films either go on to play like big superhero film roles like DC, Marvel, or Star Wars or anything like that. Uh, so yeah, I think so. Pretty much, Clerks 2 is just like your sequel to Clerks, like a few years like 12 years after the first one. You get to see Brian O'Hara and Jeff Anderson again, like slowly aging, but still have their characters. They still have their characters' energies, which is really surprising, by the way, because they still talk like them, they still move like them. So it's just like, back to the familiar guy. So we're working on another dead end job, which this time is a whole room arc of how people work at fast foods, especially like McDonald's or Wendy's or Burger King. It's just kind of just like, people can relate to that, saying how like it sucks or whatever. And there's a lot of good moments in this film, so which I'll talk about. And one of them is like the Lord of the Rings Star Wars argument with like this Lord of the Rings fan who like talks with Elias, and freaking Rando comes up and he tries to dispute his argument, tries to like degrade the characters of Frodo and Sam, which really like angers both of them. And I think it's just like, like, by the way, which is what Randall says is exactly what Kevin Smith critiqued for Lord of the Rings at the time. So he was just making fun of what he thought at the time was. Um, Other notes, shorts to mention in the film are like Rosario Dawson's character. Like, obviously, she starts out like really intimate close with Dante, but he also has like another girlfriend, which is kind of like a similar structure to Clerks One, which he had like two girlfriends, and he's like more focused on one than over the other. And so basically it's just like, your whole social drama or whatever. I don't want to get really into it, but there's a donkey show in this film, and I'm not going to explain any further than that. So afterwards, the events, Jane and Silent Bob pay them back via the royalties from the Blood Man and Chronic. So Dante and Randall get to rebuild the Quickie Stop and RST video. And the one thing I really like that Kevin Smith added to this film is, if you notice at the beginning and the end of the film, he shot their scenes entirely in black and white before color like appears in, like, actually, by the way, this is the first Clerks film to appear in color, at least. Yeah, at least in some way, and that's just like pretty out there. um Also, the movies that they shot in the restaurant is was actually a shutdown Burger King in Buena Park, California, so that's kind of like a weird thing to know, like where they actually shot the whole restaurant. Because when I first saw it, I was like, this kind of looks familiar. It's like, did I know the structure of this location? And then I just looked up. It's just like, oh yeah, it's just a shut down Burger King. So immediately 7 years after Clerks 2 release, there was another movie which I didn't watch or I didn't know about until I looked up for this video, and that's Jane Silent Bob's super groovy cartoon movie released in 2013. And from what I see well and known on the poster, I don't think it's worth a viewing, honestly, to be honest. I saw one clip and the animation is just like so low tier budget that I don't think I want to really waste my time just watching something that's going to be mediocre. So, to compensate for this whole time, 6 years in 2019 is when we get another Jay and Silent Bob movie, the reboot movie. And this film I've heard about a little bit when I was in college, so I didn't really pay attention to it much. But then I saw like a Livewire interview with Jason Mewes, which is coincidentally like pretty cool if you can like get like Jason Mewes on stage or whatever. And the whole film revolves around Jay and Silent Bob once again going to Hollywood to stop another movie made about them, which is kind of sounds like the first Jane Silent Bob film, but it's really not. It's just, well, actually, yeah, it's more the same, but there's little differences here and there. But the whole thing that the film has to do has his themes of like modern age and how social media has picked up. There's a lot of continuity from 2001 when the film came out, and there's themes of fatherhood. So basically, Jay is discovers that he's a father, right? And he doesn't know how to realize that or how to deal with that because his father left him, and he didn't know why he left him, or whatever. So that kind of like plays into the question of oh my gosh, what is he gonna do? Like, what's he gonna do with the kid that he doesn't know like 18 years? Because he's practically with Justice from the last film, who's the diamond thief, and in the end, like she was arrested or whatever, and he couldn't come see her because of like legal reasons. And the daughter of his, the actor of his daughter playing the film is Harley Quinn Smith, so this is her official debut as an actor. And for a 18-year-old, or actually for a 20-year-old, she's actually really good as an actor, which is pretty like something to say when your relative is making a film and then you're in it. So it's just like kind of like that family bond, between like relatives, like mother, like father and daughter, And the funny thing I actually learned about it while researching is she's actually around my age, which she was born like 27 days after my birthday. And again, she's a pretty good, like, for a child to adult actor, and I really applaud her for that. Also in the film are noticeable people cameos, or yeah, also notable, also yeah, noticeable people in cameos or roles like Justin Wong as a lawyer, Craig Robinson as a judge, and there's a lot of cameos and tiebacks in this film. Now that I think about it, Jay and Silent Bob reboot is practically like a second to last film to wrap up the ties of all the continuities from the other films in the universe. So, for example, in the film, you got Holden McNeil, Affleck, and Alyssa Jones, and they and Kevin Smith like practically resolved their social drama, and they're like now both a family. Also, Brody now owns a comic store at the mall where Mallrats took place. I think that's the same mall. I can't remember. Like, it looks really similar, but it could be like any mall. Funny enough, in the film, they got the entire cast of Clerks, which is ironically funny because they're like all in black and white, which is like, what their signature like look is for. Well, also in this film is Val Kilmer as a reboot Blunt Man, because that's funny because he and Affleck were Batman at the time, or both were Batmans, but they played like their respective roles like at different periods. Also in this film is Tommy Chong of Cheech and Chong as Alfred, which is fitting because he's a stoner, and Jay and Silent Bob are like two well-known stoner duos in like this whole comedy genre. There's also Chris Hemsworth as a hologram, which kind of like really surprised me. And then you got your reoccurring characters from the first Jane Silent Bob. So like they were like the people who play their characters in the film were Jason Briggs and James Vanderbeek of American Pie and Dawson's Creek fame. And then surprisingly enough, they got Method Man and Redman, who are musicians if you don't know. And then one last enough, they got Robert Kirkman at like a Comic Con, like at a Comic Con like style convention. He's the creator of Walking Dead, which actually Kevin Smith made fun of like him by like Jay like torturing him for like killing off like Carl and Glee, or yeah, actually I think it was Carl and Glenn from Walking Dead, if you know. But there's one thing I like to mention last, and that's the whole Stanley tribute. So this film came out in 2018, right? Stanley passed away in November of 2018, and Kevin Smith really wanted to contribute to him in some way. And as you like watch it to the end of the credits, you get to see a behind the scenes of Kevin Smith interacting with Stan Lee, and it's like such a wholesome moment and like a sad, unfortunate reality to come to because Kevin Smith really grew up like admiring and watching these really well-known comic book art and filmmakers like at his time of age, and Stanley was one of them. Like he was in Mallrats, if you like, as I already said, like a while ago, and that's kind of like something that really meant to him. So what does this film mean? Is it a criticism and satire about the comic book movie reboots, remakes? Which, by the way, they said like that like a million times in the film. They were like, "What's the difference between a reboot and a remake?" And someone's like, "A reboot is when you take the original productivity and you like make a little changes to it that like totally entires like ruins the originality of the first one. Well, a remake is when you take the original thing and you just completely change it overall, or something like along the lines of that. And yeah, I think I totally get where Kevin Smith is coming from, because at this time in Hollywood history, there have been like a million reboots and remakes from like horror films, like films from like the 30s, whatever, or like any film that had like a series, an original series, but then they had to reboot a remake. And in this, and there's a specific example he said in the film where someone was like, "Force Awakens is basically a reboot of Star Wars because it's practically like the exact same plot with A New Hope or whatever." Which I really like Kevin Smith's point of view on that. I mean, it is practically a reboot, and it just really tells you about like the unoriginality and like tired grownness in Hollywood, and how a lot of directors and companies are trying to make bank out of it. Like you'll see like nowadays when a movie gets made, it's only for the money, Like it's not just for the spirit and soul. Like that's the whole thing with like the movies these days. And to finish off with my retrospective, I want to get into Clerks 3, which, by the way, contains huge spoiler alerts if you haven't seen it. So I would suggest to go watch it and then come back to hear my thoughts and discussions on it. So this is your official spoiler warning, all right? So, Clerks 3 is essentially a huge gathering of everyone from Clerks 1 and Clerks 2. So, when I didn't think about it, I thought it was just going to be like, another sequel. But underneath that title, brand recognition, is actually something more to that. So, be prepared when you go watch it because you'll get emotionally driven. And yeah, I can't spoil too much about what happened, but there are a few things I like to take away from it. Number one, I wasn't aware of its release. I never heard anything about Clerks 3 online. I didn't see it on Discord or anything. Um, the only reason why I had to watch it is because I was curious to see if there were more Kevin Smith films, in which there are. And the setting and theme of this movie is practically inspired by like Kevin Smith's heart attack in 2018. So if you don't know, in 2018 he had a heart attack, and that kind of made him reevaluate his life and realize how potential and valuable it is. Because I mean, when you go through that sort of unfortunate event, you'll probably look at yourself and wonder like, what is there more for me to do in life? What can I do to turn the page and make it more ambitious, more living? Because there's people out there who live like that every day. Like they don't know that the life they're living in has potential for them, and like again, they work at dead end jobs. They really complain a lot of stuff. They're depressed. They really don't know how to like evaluate themselves, how to like look at themselves and say, what can I do to make myself better, And I really, excuse me, um, I really like how Clerks 3 really just envisions that whole idea, which is probably like why a reason of why I'm mentioning this. Like, I think it's a really good film, I think Kevin Smith really sends off a message about his personal heart attack experience and what he could say to the audience to inspire everyone else to keep going in life even when things are hard. And how it means to me as a person, as a movie fan, is growing as a 24-year-old unemployed person. I look back and honestly wonder what can I've done things wrong? What can I've done things differently? Like, could I've gone into graphics design? Could I've gone into like making YouTube videos? Can I gone into video game design? I mean, it really challenges me as a individual to look back and see like what can I do as a life. And I want to just say like thank you, Kevin Smith, for inspiring me and everybody else for this film, and all the continuity and like impact that the Clerks film has made on everyone back in 1994. Like it's kind of like a sentimental value if you see it like another way. So anyway, let me know, guys, if I missed anything or failed to mention. I know there's a lot to take in, and I tried to explain much with a good sentence in this video because there's a lot of good things about these films and like noticeable or enjoyable moments, you know. And it's been a good and long watch, and I'm gonna miss it sometimes when while Kevin Smith like writes more films in the future. Who knows? Sorry. All right, welcome everybody. Welcome to the part of the video where I am going to rank the movies based on tiers, the View Universe movies. So I just want to get this like in the video as well and try to like get my thoughts on like individually on like what movies are worth watching and what others are pretty good. So the first one is going to be Clerks, and that's going to be an S tier. I mean, it's the first of the series. It's pretty niche, cold following. It's pretty iconic and memorable for its black and white art style and like the whole like personal struggling work at a dead end job while having a relationship. I think that's pretty cool. Mallrats, I'm gonna give that an A. Again, it's not a sequel to Clerks, but it takes place in the same universe. So that kind of like that really took me by surprise. And there are a few good moments here and there, but I think it's just like not as like you know. Actually, you know, when I think about it, I think it definitely deserves an S tier because I heard a lot of people really like this film, and it's just like, again, with Clerks in that '90s style, like how things are good, really bad thing. Chasing Amy, I'm gonna give it an S tier. I think that's a really good film to watch for like a comedy drama, romantic drama, yeah, romantic comedic romantic, whatever that art genre. I don't know too much about it, like that whole genre. Pretty memorable moments, pretty good acting, pretty good characters, developments, or whatever. I really liked that ending and how it was like how bitter yet sweet, you know. Dogma, I'm gonna have to give it an A because that whole plot, central plot, is like really different from like the other films that Kevin Smith has made throughout his entire life. It's just like really out there going, you know, there. Clerks animated series, I give that an A. Um, Again, you had to be there to see it, you know. And even though while it's really short, it's still Clerks, you know. It's still more of the old formula that branched off from like the first one, and I think it's definitely worth a watch. Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. That's gonna be an A tier. No, actually, it's S tier because it's pretty also memorable and like worth watching. Especially a lot of people were really hyped up for the movie when it released, and there's a lot of good things about it. Clerks 2, I'm gonna give that an A tier. Again, sequel to Clerks. Not much has actually much has changed, but it's just like excuse me. Um, I don't know. There's just something about it that's not like S tier. Like there's a few things missing from that film that I can't explain. But it's still like a good film to watch. You know, whatever. Um, Jane Silent Bob's super groovy cartoon movie F tier. I really don't like the animation, and I'm not even gonna watch it or whatever. Jay and Silent Bob reboot. I probably give that a B tier. Like even though it's like practically a continuity from Jay and Silent Bob Strikes Back, it still has that whole modern age social commentary, and I know there's going to be fans out there who will despise this movie for filling in cash for the nostalgia or whatever. And I can totally see that. Like it's been like 18 years since the first and second movie, and for 18 years for Kevin Smith to make that long, like it's just really just like questionable. And keep in mind that Kevin Smith also made movies in between his View Universe films. Like he made Tusk, which is sort of like a really like eccentric and so bad. Maybe it's good film. I don't know. I haven't seen it personally. And then Clerks 3 S tier. I really liked how emotionally impactful it was to me, and I really praise Kevin Smith on closing the knots and just like making things off to a good start and then finishing it by going back in circle and just yeah, like honestly, just whatever. So thank you very much everyone for watching the video. I hope you give it a like, subscribe, and comment, and I'll try to continue to bounce around my ideas and experiment with these whole retrospective movies. So if there's like anything I am really passionate about, I'll probably definitely make it, and I'll try to bring you guys as much entertainment as possible. Thank you for all supporting the channel, and I really hope you have a good day. Thank you.